It's great to have Peter Ritchie at the Sydney Institute tonight. Peter's one of our associate members, but he's also the writer of The Magic of McDonald's, Bring It to Your Business by Peter Ritchie, which has just been published. And I'll introduce him briefly. Peter Ritchie joined McDonald's in 1970. He was the first employee in Australia and outside North America, and opened the first McDonald's store in Australia in 1971. He spent 32 years as the CEO, chairman of McDonald's Australia, and was a director of McDonald's in New Zealand, Hong Kong and Malaysia, and served 2 one-year terms as an advisory director on the board of McDonald's. He also was involved, of course, with the Seven Network and other businesses in Australia, including Westpac Bank and others. But tonight he's here as the author of this book. Very welcome, and the topic for tonight is From Hamburger Store to Global Icon, the story of McDonald's. Peter Ritchie, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerard. Thank you all for coming. I'm totally surprised, I've got to say. I had visions of it being Anne and Gerard and I. So thank you so much for coming out on such a cold night. And I hope we haven't overpromised with that title, because I'm not really qualified to talk about McDonald's worldwide. As Gerard said, I had a 32-year career, but all in Australia. And so you'll find that my comments will be based entirely upon that experience. And all I can do to talk about international success is to extrapolate a little bit from Australia. But we have set the pace here in Australia, so that may be what Anne had in mind when she limited me to that title. I always start on an occasion like this by apologising to the audience. It's been over 20 years now since I quit as chairman of McDonald's Australia, and I still am inclined to use the terms we and us, and I can't help myself. And I've got an excuse in that I still love the company, and I still stay in touch with them, although I try not to interfere at all with the responsibility of the CEO in particular. So if I do use those terms, please forgive me. 2 other things that I like to say at the outset also is that I don't have any tickets on myself. I'm just a bloke who's been making hamburgers for 22 years, 32 years, and learning from my mistakes, and hopefully growing from there. And so I'm not a business guru of any sort, nor do I have visions of myself as a remarkable leader of any kind. Again, I've learnt that as I've gone along, the what might be termed the secrets to leadership, and they're set out, well, my version of them is set out in the book, so buy it and read it. I do have a purpose, though. This evening I want to start by claiming to be the Émile Zola of the 21st century, because I want to say j'accuse. J'accuse Australian industry, Australian trade unions, and because I want it to be consistent with the French analogy, the Fourth Estate, of conducting a conspiracy of silence about the paucity of industrial training in Australia. And I wrote those notes out to myself, and I used the term paucity just because it came to my head. And I thought, gee, you better check exactly what that means. You know, what does paucity mean? So I look up synonyms: shortage, lack, deficiency, dearth, inadequacy. And I said, yeah, that's what I want to talk about, the inadequacy of training in Australian industry. And I wonder if some of you are saying to yourself, how can he say that? You know, what's the evidence? Well, there's an easy answer for me, is to point you to the numbers. How we in Australia have slid down that ranking of productivity of all the countries that matter, all the countries that we should be comparing ourselves to. We've slid constantly down that ranking, and it's undeniable. We're getting poorer and poorer productivity-wise, our industry. We never compared well with the US, but now our productivity is nearly half what it is in the US. So that's all the evidence I think that we need. I've got a second, more important piece of evidence which I will get to. I was sort of involved in these two happenings that I'm going to talk to you about, but in the mid-70s, there was a report prepared by a bloke called David Crawford, and Gerard might have known him, some of you know him, and it looked at how we were doing compared with the rest of the world in training our people. And his summing up, David Crawford's summing up, was we're inadequate. And the report very succinctly set that out and said, well, what should we do about it? Well, we should have and I don't know what he called it, but I think it was called a training guarantee levy, which may have been the term that torpedoed him, because it didn't ever fly. It went over like a lead balloon, and it was basically thrown out by the large companies. Didn't go anywhere in terms of acceptance. Yeah, that was the 70s. And then we turned to the 90s, and I'm skipping over something because I'm going to go back to it. But in the 90s, the Fed had the fortitude to legislate. And again, I think they called it a guarantee levy. Anybody remember that? Training guarantee levy? And they actually got it through both houses and got it into legislation. And you'd think, what a great achievement, eh? We saw what we needed, and we legislated for it, and we got it done. Almost unbelievably, the lobbyists got it thrown out. Well, how did that happen? I don't recall how it happened. I was probably too busy making hamburgers. But the legislation was withdrawn after it had got through both houses and had been passed. And it wasn't a levy. It was a sort of a floor which said something like, if you don't spend 3% of your total payroll on training your people, then we'll put it into a pool and we'll spend it for you. Which sounds like a tax, but it isn't really. It's just a floor under the amount of money that was spent on training, in my opinion. It says pause here, so I better read that pause. We had that much awareness 70 years ago, and then again in the 90s, 20 years ago, and we just let it slide away. And since then, we've done nothing about improving training in our industry, and we've, as I pointed out at the start, we've slid down the world rankings of training in industry. The book now relates to, and one of the magic parts of McDonald's is all about training, of course. The book relates how that awareness came to me very indirectly in a way, because what I was saddled with here in Australia was nearly the highest labour cost in the McDonald's world. And so in 1985, I was making money and giving the company a return, but not doing anything outstanding, and in my opinion, was running a pretty mediocre operation. So I said to my top management team around me, let's go and benchmark. Let's go and see how it's being done in other parts of the world. And we went around the world. We went to Europe, and then we came back through Asia and looked at a lot of the McDonald's operations. And to cut a long story short, we finished up back in a store in Singapore. And I can remember vividly to this day sitting around the table with 6 of my top people And I said, this is what we've got to match. This store is so good, we just have to set it as our target. And some of them, in fact most of them, were inclined to say, we can't do that. Look at the number of people that they have on the floor in this store, and why is it so clean, and why is service so quick, etc., etc. It's because of the number of people. And I knew that was, basically true, but I thankfully wasn't prepared to accept it. And I said, no, we have to be able to produce a store that's as clean and the service is as quick and friendly as this one. And how do you do that? Well, you train your people better. If we can't afford to put more people on the floor, we had to make the people in the store that much more capable and effective and efficient. So when I went to Chicago to get my plans approved for 1986, I said in my proposal to them, I'm going to spend 35% of my total corporate bottom line on additional training. And I give the president at the time, a guy called Fred Turner, who I became very close to, so much credit for letting me go along with that, because I didn't really know that I was going to be able to achieve what I wanted to, and neither did he, of course. But he approved that spend on additional training in 1986. And we spent that much more that year on training. Things like building a new facility, updating all our manuals, starting to rewrite our training manuals, more people, or anything that I could do that I thought would improve the level of our training in the stores. Can I tell you it was instant? No, not quite. But by the end of the year, I was actually, end of 1986, I was getting a couple of letters from customers. And, for somebody to go to a McDonald's and have a hamburger and write to the managing director about it, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah. But they were doing that sort of thing, saying things like, I don't know what you've done in your store, but gee, our last visit was so much more pleasant. And that happened within a year of starting that spend. Now, I knew it wasn't going to fix our problem in quick time. I didn't know how long it was going to take, so I kept on spending. For 5 years, from 86 to 91, I kept spending. And I should have mentioned to you that in McDonald's, we have a very, very objective way of measuring the productivity in the stores. We're able to compare, for even a 15-minute time period, the number of customers served, transactions completed, with the number of labour hours used in the store, management and labour in the store. And there's no currency involved in that. The product around the world is pretty much the same. And so it's a very objective measurement compared with other McDonald's around the world. And on that measurement, we were bottom 5% of the world in 1985. We were way down. Did it instantly jump? No, we didn't suddenly, leap to fourth in the list or anything like that. But over 5 years, we inexorably climbed up the rankings. And in 1991, we got to number one in the world. We were on that measurement. McDonald's Australia was the most productive company in the world. And I still get a sort of a shiver of pride when I'm telling you that, because it says so much about the capability of young Australians when they're given the right environment, training and leadership. And number one in the world in 1991, and we've been there ever since. And I keep checking on that because I'm so proud of it, of course. So that was the lesson I had. How McDonald's became number one in the McDonald's world. And that leads me to, well, that's basically the crux of the book too, I might tell you, because it says the magic of McDonald's. What is the magic of McDonald's? Read the book and you'll find out. But I'm happy to talk about it in question time, of course. I'll sum it up in my words if you like. I want to get to the other major piece of evidence that I believe is evidence about our paucity of training here in Australia. Because not only do we have a paucity of training, we also have a paucity of leadership. And of course, those two things are causally connected, I believe. Well, I bet we could have a great night just talking amongst ourselves about Australian leadership in Australia right now, and I would love to do that. I bet most of you would have a strong opinion and would like to suggest some ways of improving things. Well, here's some of my comments about it. The book talks a little about the number of foreigners running our big companies. And when I first started to be interested in this, it was really deplorable. The statistics that in those days, and this is probably 20 years ago, it's improved slightly since then, but it's still bad, I believe. Our two largest companies, our four largest banks, our two largest retailers, one after the other, one by one, we were importing leadership for. And as I said, it has slightly improved, but still not much. The percentage of companies being run by foreigners sounds like a pejorative when I say it like that, doesn't it? But you know what I mean. I'm a bit of an outlier on what I think the role of boards should be. But clearly they've fallen down for a long, long time on one thing, and that's assuring succession. And what that succession comes from, of course, is good training within. And our boards have just not done a good enough job over the last 40, maybe even 50 years. So that shortage of leadership stems from, in my opinion, poor in-company training. And I'm now going to contrast. I'm holding McDonald's up like we're something remarkable, but that's not the case. It's just the fact that we have had a continual flow of leaders coming out of our organisation. We've continued to grow our own, put it that way. We've had 15-year-olds. No, not 15-year-olds. All of our young people who started with us, generally they're lined up at 15 years of age to get into the crew of McDonald's. And they've gone on to leadership not only in the McDonald's world, but in other parts of the world too. And I can name a few. Anthony Martinez, the current CEO in Australia, has just come back from running South Korea. And the CEO here that he replaced, a guy called Andrew Gregory, has gone off to run the franchising world from Chicago. Charlie Bell, who some of you might even know, who sadly died at 42 years of age, he went on from here to run the worldwide company. He was made president of the worldwide company and died within a year, sadly. Guy Russo, Guy and Charlie both started about the same age in 14 and 9 months, one in Kingsford and one in Helston Park store, and both of them were telling me they were going to run the company at some point, and in both cases they were right. Russo ran China. He had 1,000 stores in China and came back to I won't go into the stories of the individuals, but Guy came back to run Kmart for Richard Gorder and did that remarkably successfully, and has now made himself a very, very rich young man in leading Guzman and Gomez to a successful IPO. We have a young lady called Sky Anderson who's in the States at the moment, running half of the US, and I'm told has a really good chance of becoming the next worldwide president. So they're the sort of individuals that have come out of the system. The reason behind that stream of young people proving their capability at those various levels and in other companies is because during the training at McDonald's, they become supremely self-confident. It's just a joy for me to watch them grow and watch how confident they become. I said to, we have 19-year-olds running $10 million businesses. And I mean running, really responsible for hiring all the staff, ordering all the product, just ensuring that the customers get exactly what they expect when they come to McDonald's. And one by one they keep popping up, and we shovel them around the world, of course, but they also become our franchisees too. So they're a source of fantastically capable franchisees too. So part of the explanation in the book refers to entrepreneurial spirit. We teach them to be entrepreneurs. As well, not much difference between that and good business people, is there? It's all about self-confidence is what I'm trying to say. And is there a secret to McDonald's training? Is it especially sophisticated? Absolutely not. In fact, it's almost the reverse of that. It's very, very basic, the McDonald's training. But I thought I might finish up this evening by summing McDonald's training up for you, and then hand over to you for questions, because it's an ideal place to begin a bit of a discussion. What I always sum the McDonald's training up with 3 words. First word is detail, and it's detail to the extreme, to the point where I have been in the past had it thrown at me like a criticism. You don't leave any room for initiative, or you're creating robots. And I know why people would say that sort of thing, because it is detailed. I mean, we just don't say greet the customer to one of the steps of service. Used to be anyway, before they were doing it on a screen, which I hate. We used to say there are 6 steps of service, and the first one is greet the customer. And what I discovered in the first store at Yaguna that we opened, I discovered that didn't mean the same thing to many people, and particularly young 15 and 16-year-olds. They weren't capable of greeting the customer. And I had to say, you've got to greet the customer, and next is not a greeting. I learned myself the hard way that I needed to be that specific. We were telling people to say, "Good morning, may I help you?" Yeah, smile, and they were pretty artificial about it to start with, but very soon they become self-confident, But you have to put those sort of words in their mouth at times, and that's what I had to do. So detailed from the start. Structured. McDonald's training is totally structured. So if you're trained in a McDonald's store and they've said, we'll train you on, first of all, on front counter, you learn that, and you're ticked off when you become competent at that. You acknowledge that you are capable at that sort of thing. And then you know what the next step is. You go to some other station in the store and you're ticked off on that, and then you're ticked off on that. And then when you get to assistant manager, you're ticked off on that. And that's that's structured. The structure is there, so they know what the next step is. And the final thing is that you are tracked. We know at any particular time what the capability of any individual in the store is, because we need to know that. You can't schedule a shift without knowing that you've got enough people for grill or enough people for front counter or enough people for fries. So you've got to know what their capability is, and each of them, and we do, and each of them do too, because they're told, and that's where the self-confidence come from. They're told that they're capable, and so they get right through the crew training, and they know they can run a McDonald's store, and it's so satisfying to be a boss producing young people like that on a constant basis. And I think that, as I said, I think that is an appropriate time for me to say, to hand over to you, and let's make a bit of a discussion if we could.
So we get around to this session. Next.
Well, that might be me.
So we've got a copy of The Magic McDonald's, Bring It to Your Business by Peter Ritchie. $99.95, but tonight a special price at Sydney Institute, $20. Because unlike McDonald's, we can't do change here. Fries. That'd be another, yeah. That'd be included in the $20, yeah. Okay, so now we come to, let's talk about your book. You go to page 6 of your book, and there's a contents page, from memory, which says about the author, which is on page 2. So you've got to go back. And it doesn't tell us much about you. It tells us a bit about you in water polo. But how did you get into McDonald's? I mean, where did you come from, who became so successful at an international company? I mean, apart from playing water polo where there are no hamburgers involved, what happened to you?
Oh, thanks, Gerard. I love talking about myself. Not. McDonald's had a commitment to local training from the moment they went international. And that largely came from Fred Turner, who was the guy who, Ray Crocker's the founder of the company, but the bloke who really made it successful was this bloke who his name was Fred Turner, and he wrote the training manual and operations manual and created the company, I believe. Ray was a character, a real enthusiast, but he didn't have the ability to build the company like Fred Turner did anyway. I became good friends in the process of... no, I shouldn't have started there. I should have said, and W.D. Scott were employed to find somebody in Australia. And so they approached me. I was running a property development company. I'd done commerce at UNSW, and I was running a property development company at the time. And so I had my accounting qualifications and property, and it was an ideal basis for them to employ. And so I went through the process, and this is going into probably much too much detail, but I sat down in the W.D. Scott reception area, and they handed me the 1969 annual report of McDonald's. They had 1,400 stores open in the US, and that's all. Oh no, they had a few stores open in Canada, but that's all. And I said, "Oh, bloody American hamburger joint! Who would want to work for them?" You know. And but then they said, "We'd like you to do an IQ test." You wouldn't have been doing those in those days, Alan, but IQ test and a psychology test. And that's the only reason I stayed around. I wanted to see how I'd go in those tests. So then a few weeks later, we're driving home across the Harbour Bridge. My wife was working in the city too. And she said, "What, did you have lunch with that American today?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "What did he say?" And I said, "I don't know, but I think he's going to offer me the job. Do we want it?" We had no kids, footloose and fancy free, and so they'd said they'd like to take us to the States to train us. And so we talked seriously for the first time about that evening, and we regarded it as totally an adventure. We'd just go off to Chicago on an adventure. And we look back now and she laments it because I was working much too hard for many, many years. And I don't know how we survived actually, but we did, thankfully. I was working 100 hours a week in the really early years, and you can't do that without killing yourself, you know, which I nearly did. But I was also a sportsman, Gerard, so I got through that with water polo. I think I gave up water polo then, but now I'd like to go to how I became a leader, because I had no ideas that I was a leader. I'd been selected in teams, Manly Warringah, Surf Lifesaving. I'd captained on a number of occasions, and every time I'd sort of said to myself, yeah, well, you got in the team, that's good, but why'd they make you captain, you know? And water polo was a bit the same. I captained Australian universities at water polo, and I captained a number of third-rate rugby sides at the time, but I hadn't really given the process of leadership any thought whatsoever. Long story short, Brian Finn, who I was on the business council with in the 80s, he was the chief executive of IBM. He said to me, Pete, will you come and talk to my mid-management people about leadership? And I said, sure, Brian, I'll do that. And then I thought, wait a minute, what do you know about leadership? And so I started for the first time in my life. That would have been, I was probably 30s at least. I gave some thought to the process of leadership and realised that nobody had even mentioned it to me at any point. So I got out and talked to a number of other leaders on the BCA at the time, got nothing from them. I didn't. I used to name names when I say that, but I've talked to a good mate who was the captain of the Wallabies. He said, I try to lead by example. You know, well, that didn't help me much either. Anyway, I realised I had to do it myself, and I started to think about, you know, what had I done, and then I thought how much better I could have done it, and started to make lists like this in the book of things that might make you a better leader if you want to be one. So it's learned from hard knocks, that lesson. And I've got right off the track, Gerard. I'm so sorry. Do you think I am?
You're at the end of the track.
Yeah, okay. That's probably a clue, so I'll... Next, Gerard.
Right, so where do we go next? Well, we go here, and then we go there.
You've spoken about how you were able to get the productivity and service levels up to number one in the world. What are some of the innovations in McDonald's worldwide which originated in Australia?
There are a few, but they're not really connected to the improvement in productivity that we saw. It was just more attention to the detail and to the training. But Charlie Bell took entire credit for McCafe, which now is probably doing $1 billion in sales in Australia, just McCafe. I was surprised myself even the other day. McDonald's is serving 1 in every 4 cups of coffee sold in Australia right now. So that's a big... and Charlie went to the US. I won't tell you the inside story, but he's not the actual sole founder. It's like they always say, you know, success have many fathers. Failure is a lonely orphan. But anyway, Charlie was taking it to the US, and it would have been in every store in the US by now if he'd been still alive. Salads, I think we pioneered to a large extent. I tried a lot of things on salads. Russo actually was CEO when he came up with the best McDonald's product, the one that we basically have now. and what else can I claim responsibility for? They're really the thing that people know about big time is the McCafe, because it's had a big impact on McDonald's and on Starbucks, I'm glad to say.
Thank you. Peter, I'd actually thought of my question before, but it does segue, before you spoke on that last bit on leadership, but it does segue from that to some extent. You mentioned that you have formal qualifications, those boring old things called university qualifications. With your young people coming through the McDonald's University, what is the role then of formal qualifications in the tertiary education system? I'm thinking specifically of MBAs, for example. Do you see those as important as well as cream on the top for your future leaders?
What a good question. Yeah, what I always said to my people as they were growing within the system, people like Charlie and Russo and even Sky, I used to say to them, look, we'll keep you growing within McDonald's as long as we can, but we'll always find you something to enable you to keep growing outside McDonald's. So I found tertiary courses and things like that. But to some extent, those two guys, the two that I'm most proud of, Charlie and Guy, I stole them from their education, basically. You know, they came to work for me at 15 instead of going on to their HSCs. So I always felt a little bit of guilt about that. We do give a retail certificate in McDonald's now. It's an approved retail qualification, and it's as good as any that you'll get in the industry by far. So, and then do we encourage people into the MBA? I can't actually tell you whether that's the case or not now. I never did personally. I always thought that once they got through the McDonald's training and they were full of self-confidence, if I sent them to an MBA, they'd finish up lecturing, you know. No, MBAs are great things, and at some point, you know, in people's lives, they probably should do them, but it's not. Well, I've never recommended it, put it that way. The retail qualification is highly sought after in McDonald's, though.
If I could just go back a little bit in history. I read once when Ray Kroc was establishing McDonald's, he didn't want to get into the supply business. He wanted the growers to actually grow along with McDonald's. Does that philosophy still pertain, and even in a country like Australia and the United States?
Yeah, very much so. I mention it in the book because it's one of the fundamentals that Ray went to. He had no money at 52 years of age when the McDonald brothers said, yeah, you... So we're talking about Ray. Tell us who Ray is. Ray Kroc. Everybody know. He's the bloke that... you don't know. Okay, the McDonald brothers had a hamburger operation on the west coast of the US straight after really after the Second World War, and by 55 they were doing reasonably well. And Ray went out and saw their operation. He was a milkshake machine salesman from Chicago, and he got an order from them for 6 milkshake machines. And he saw their operation and he said, gee, if I can talk these blokes into opening more stores, I'll sell them a lot more milkshake mixes. And that's where it all started. So they were doing well enough. And I met those two guys, Dick and McDonald. I met them in the early 70s. Ray bought them out in the early 60s. And the movie The Founder, anybody seen that movie? Really good movie and really accurate. Michael Keating did such a good job of capturing Ray Kroc, I think, in the movie. But Ray went back and had no money. So he said to some of his friends in the golf club, you want to put money in and we'll open a store here in Des Plaines, Illinois. And away they went. But he also said to suppliers, look, I can't promise you the world, but I think we're going to grow really big. If you work with me, I'll make sure that I look after you and we share profits. And that sort of philosophy worked. They committed to spending money and improving their product and their production methods and growing their business with Ray. And I met on the board, and still on the board. When I was on the board first in 1971, there were still a couple of McDonald's suppliers on the board. And they were like family members, you know. One other important thing that you probably know, McDonald's has never signed a contract with a supplier. It's all handshake. we do a deal, you know, and it's worked well for McDonald's. As far as I know, they still work that way.
Just going back to the question about education, what's remarkable about your talk is how pragmatic it all is. It's real, it's happening, and it's all based on outcomes, along with the best strategy to reach outcomes. My experience with public service, for little it is, though I have had a few moments, they're not concerned with outcomes, they're concerned with process, and they're concerned with education, they're concerned with theoretical. What can we do to make our education system more like your training, in the sense that far too many of our young people are going on to theoretical degrees and whatever, and that's possibly one of the reasons for our low productivity?
Oh, I think you're so right, Anne. You described me. Actually, I'm the ultimate pragmatist. Yeah, I've been mentoring a final year AGSM student for about the last 10 years. And I've lamented in the book, actually, about how much better they would have been if they'd spent their 3 or 4 years getting their undergraduate degree in a McDonald's store. Well, maybe. But the reality is, I said somebody might have done a study of this at some time, but somebody ought to measure how long it takes for a graduate, and a graduate's proven they've got the intellect, so they ought to be able to catch up pretty quickly. But nobody's done that test to see how long it might take them to catch up, because one by one, without exception, I've said, gee, I wish that this kid had, this practical experience that McDonald's is giving people day to day. So, I don't know. But what I'm doing, and whenever I can, is talking to educators to see if they can get anything out of my experience too, what I've said, I've had a long contact with the UNSW, mainly because I played rugby with John Nyland, who was the Vice-Chancellor for a long time. So he's involved me out there, and I've been talking to graduate classes for a long time. One thing that I tell them to think about is look around you. I've said to a graduating class, look around you, because you're looking at the leaders of Australia in 20 years' time. And I said, some of you have got to start thinking of yourselves as future leaders, because I'll bet you're not now. And a lot of them acknowledged subsequently that they never have been. They're almost discouraged from thinking of themselves as a leader, as a future leader. And, I start off sometimes talking about leadership by asking the audience, what's Bill Clinton's middle name? Jefferson, yeah, there's always somebody that knows it. So, some smart. I wouldn't choose him as a role model, but his parents obviously did, and they wanted to give their son a name that might inspire him to think of himself as a future leader in the US. Then I say to the audience, okay, you're a parent and you've just had a son or a daughter and you want to give them a similarly inspiring name. give me a name out of Australian history. Monash?
What about McKillop?
Yeah, Mary McKillop. Yeah, I've had both those on occasions, but you know the most common answer I got to that for a long, long time? Ned Kelly. I used to think they've got to be joking, you know, cheap Irish crook. But there's a dearth of, a paucity of leaders in our history too. So we don't have many role models, and we need some. Hawke, I've had. Keating, I've had. Mary McKillop, a few times. Yeah, no, it's really hard, isn't it? So, of course, you know what John Howard's middle name is?
Yes.
Yeah. They had to go to British history, though, and sadly.
If Ned Kelly were around, he'd be stealing from McDonald's, wouldn't he?
Well, I've got to tell you a funny one about that. I had a guy who was helping me. He was in charge of the New York market in the US, and I said, "Oh, we've been focusing on security here. We've done security classes, etc., etc. We've just won one at Cremorne. The franchisee there is a really, really close mate of mine. He'd just run the front counter staff through the security, and security first thing is you never press the no sale button, which will open the register. So you'd only open the register when there's a sale. And so the next day, a robber comes in and points a gun at the register girl and says, "Give me all the money in the register." And she says, "No." You know, like we say, give them the money and get them out of there, you know. But she said, no, I can't do that. I can't press. And she was talking with him like this, and in the end he went, "Oh." But that wasn't the story I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you, this guy said, "Oh, you think that's bad?" He said, "I had a store in New York that was robbed 30 times in a month."
Peter, you provided leadership in the Red Shield appeal, I recall, in the in the 1980s. And you got store managers involved in that whole campaign. Did you regard that as part of their training, or was it more a sense of wanting to do something for the community and perhaps improve marketing for their
Probably
stores?
a bit of both, Alan. Probably a bit of both. But
Just tell us what the Red Shield appeal was.
I was chairman of the Door Knock appeal for about 10 years. For the Salvation Army, yeah. And we had a lot of fun, didn't we? I had some very high-profile people as my chairmans of areas. What were you called? Chairman, yeah. The headmistress of Ascombe, what's her name? Rowena. She worked for me too. She was the chairman of the Door Knock appeal in her area. So those sort of people, it was really fun to work with them. And I never took any credit for it, but I was chairman for 10 years and we got record collections. So, and your question really was it training or was it involvement in the community? And I said both. It was partly training, but McDonald's, Ray Kroc always said McDonald's is a local business. We've got to be part of a local business community. And so all the franchisees and even our store managers were encouraged to be in local organisations, Rotary, etc., etc. And it was part of that. I was setting the tone sort of thing by taking on the chairmanship at the top.
I was in Moscow some time ago when McDonald's opened. It was winter. It was queue over 2 kilometers long.
I was there too.
Tell me, would you know what's happened to McDonald's in Russian Federation now after the invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah, it's gone. In fact, Andrew Gregory, the guy who's now running worldwide franchising, was given the responsibility to get rid of the stores. And he sold them all about, it'd be a couple of years ago now. And we were pleased to be out of there.
Why please? No income or business generated?
Oh, no, it was just, I think it was having a really negative effect on the image of McDonald's.
How did Ronald McDonald House come about?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you for that. It happened in the US because one of the Philadelphia Eagles players had a handicapped child or something where they were in hospital, and they discovered this need for nearby accommodation for families. And it went from there, and they had a few stores, a few Ronald McDonald houses open in the US. And I said, if that is the case in the US, it's bound to be the same here. And so I went to John Yu, the chief executive of the Kids Hospital Alexandra Children's Hospital, and said, well, I can help you provide this facility if you want. And I got rejected. Anyway, a little while later, a couple of the oncology doctors there came to me and said, look, we desperately need, because oncology, they've got people long-term treatment and they're in and out of hospital. We desperately need this. And we went around the administration of the hospital in a funny way to open the first one. And history tells the story now. We've got about 20 in Australia. And they're all doing extremely well. I've recently chaired a fundraising to expand the Westmead one, and it's a fantastically big facility, but it's still not big enough. We added 60 rooms, and it's still not big enough. We're running out of rooms on regular occasions because of parents who need to be there and have to come a long way. And it also does more than just provide accommodation. You know, it provides support, peer group support from other parents, and that sort of thing is so important in that situation. And I've had to stop going there because I get too emotional about it. It's
Peter,
no, go on. Sorry.
we're getting towards the end, so I've got a question from one of our people on the Zoom call. She asked about you. He said that there's excellent training coming with young people, 15-year-olds plus, who go through McDonald's. But what's required to get a franchise? Do you have to have that sort of background, or can you do, she says, like you did with a degree from UNSW?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And I talk in the book about that. If you want a McDonald's franchise, buy the book. Because McDonald's, I refer to the magic. The bit of magic is that we teach entrepreneurial attitudes and spirit, but we don't look for entrepreneurs. In fact, we look for the reverse. We look for people who are energetic, enthusiastic about what they do, but that we don't want them to know much about the food business because we'd rather teach them our way about that. So we look for people who are, well, qualified with those skills, preparedness to work hard, and energy and enthusiasm. And we've got the best bunch of franchisees in the world. They're a joy to be with, like our young employees.
Okay, well, I think that's a good theme to finish on. So I should say once again, we've got copies of The Magic of McDonald's by Peter Ritchie, and thanks for an important but entertaining talk here tonight. And of course, some of us who are aware of young people who've gone to work with McDonald's know very well what the training does for the general community, not just for your own businesses or what were your businesses, but for the general community. So thanks for putting this together, and well done tonight. Thank you.